The wind screamed like a woman mourning. Inside the stone house, she gripped the wool blanket with bloodied fists, screaming, shaking, not from fear, but from the life fighting its way out of her. He'd never delivered a child before, never saved anyone. But tonight, he was the fire, and she was the storm. She cried for a child who hadn't yet taken her first breath. He stood guard with nothing but his hands and heart. No doctor, no midwife, only two souls battered by the world and a fire that refused to die. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a heartbeat rose louder than the storm. They weren't just surviving the night. They were about to bring a life into a world that had tried to kill them both. The snow didn't fall, it devoured. Thick sheets of white swallowed the world around Graywood Ridge, blanketing rot, ruin, and regret. Horses steamed in place, hooves cracking over frost-bitten mud. A wagon stood still at the edge of a dying cattle yard, and shackled to its rear axle like a beast of burden, stood a girl, Delilah Vane, 7 months pregnant, skin wind-burned and raw, lips split from cold. Her wrists, cuffed in rusted iron, bled slowly beneath linen wraps stiff with ice. Her breath ghosted the air, but her eyes, those didn't move. They stared ahead, at nothing, at everything. 10 feet away, Reuben Cade, her brother by blood, not by bond, spoke with a rancher reeking of old leather and sour whiskey. "She's healthy," Reuben said, like he was bartering over livestock. "Strong legs. She don't talk much. That baby's near ready, and it'll come clean." The rancher grunted, sizing her up with dead eyes. "She run?" "She won't," Reuben answered, lips curling into a grin. "Not anymore." Delilah flinched, not from fear of them, but from within. A sharp, unexpected jolt punched from the inside of her belly. Then another. It wasn't the gentle rolling she'd grown used to. This was urgent, rhythmic, a protest, a cry without sound. Her knees nearly buckled. Then, another kick. Her heart raced. The world narrowed to her own chest and the heartbeat she carried beneath it. The baby was speaking in the only way it could, demanding. Not this, not sold, not owned, not born in chains, Delilah whispered, barely a breath. "I hear you." She didn't plan to run. There had been no plan. But some things didn't need planning. Some things only needed the right kind of terror, the kind that cracks frozen ground under your feet. When the wagon creaked forward and her brother turned his back for a silver coin, she twisted. One shoulder, one heave. The chain caught on the rail. Crack. Then she ran, into the blinding white, into the cold that sliced her skin open, into a forest where the trees didn't ask where she came from, only if she would keep going. The axe struck pine with a dull thud, sending a pulse through the frost-hardened log. Silas Beckett paused mid-swing, head tilted, eyes narrowing toward the wind. Something had changed. In Graywood Ridge, silence was a language all its own, and tonight, something had interrupted its grammar. It wasn't the cry of wolves or the settling groan of snow-packed limbs. This sound was softer, ripped breath, staggered movement, human. Silas set the axe into a stump, wiping his hands down the front of his wool coat. He moved quickly, boot prints light in the powder, every step guided more by instinct than intent. Years alone in these woods had turned him into something between man and shadow. Then he saw it, a smear of red, a broken trail, and at the base of a ridge, crumpled like a dropped shawl in the snow, was a woman. She was curled inward, one arm wrapped protectively over her swollen belly, face turned toward the trees. Her lips were blue, her fingers stiff. Her coat had long since stopped holding warmth. And yet, she was breathing, barely. Silas crouched beside her. Not a word, just assessment. Her boots were soaked through, one missing entirely. Ice matted her hair. Her skin was the color of ash. The baby beneath her coat kicked weakly against the cold. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't need to. Trouble came in many shapes to Graywood Ridge, but none deserved to die in the snow. He stood, scanned the woods, then moved fast. With practiced hands, he gathered branches to sweep her tracks. He kicked fresh snow over her blood trail, found a nearby brush line and dug a snare, not for deer but for men. Then he returned. She hadn't moved. He bent down, lifted her into his arms like a bundle of firewood, and grunted under the weight. "You're light," he muttered to no one. "Too damn light." He cradled her carefully against his chest. The snow stung his face, but he didn't flinch. His cabin sat a half-mile east, hidden beneath thick fir trees and wrapped in drift. He didn't light fires for strangers, but tonight something inside him sparked. Delilah woke to the sound of crackling fire and the thick, still silence of a room too used to being alone. For a moment she didn't move. The pain in her legs was dull now, numb by warmth. Her back ached, her throat was raw, and her belly felt like a stone pressed against her spine. But she was alive, and she was warm. The ceiling above her was low, planked in old timber that smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Somewhere nearby, snow hissed softly against a window pane. The room breathed slow like it was waiting. She blinked and turned her head. A stove sat against the far wall, the fire inside it glowing orange and alive. Beside it, steam rose from a battered kettle. And just beyond the stove, nestled in shadow, stood a cradle. Handmade, quietly proud, worn but whole. She stared at it. The cradle was angled to catch the heat from the fire. A faded quilt lined its interior, corners tucked with care. It wasn't new, but someone had made it ready. Someone had believed a child belonged there. Delilah's eyes filled before she could stop them. Her hand drifted to her stomach, the life within her calm now, perhaps sensing safety for the first time. Beside her on a small wooden table sat a folded scrap of paper. She reached for it with trembling fingers, unfolding it carefully. "Don't lift anything heavy. Your belly's big as a grain barrel. SB." She let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. It was the first time in months someone had spoken to her without cruelty, without command, without price. Her gaze wandered, past a tin mug, a worn leather strap, and a wooden comb sanded smooth. Every item in the room had been placed with purpose, not decoration. It was a home built by calloused hands that had long since stopped hoping anyone would visit. And yet, here she was. No voice greeted her. No man stood waiting for thanks. But in every detail, from the dry boots near the fire to the cradle's careful angle, she heard what wasn't said. "You are not alone anymore." The wind shifted that night, sharp and sudden, like it was carrying whispers. Silas felt it first. He had been mending the latch on the cabin door when the silence changed. The forest had gone still, not with peace, but with warning. Inside, Delilah sat near the fire, sewing a loose hem with steady fingers. Her eyes met his, and she knew. No words were needed. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pressed his hand against a wooden panel built into the far wall. With a soft click, it opened to reveal a crawl space, low, narrow, and lined with pine bedding. "In," he said quietly. Delilah didn't argue. She pulled the blanket tighter around her belly and crawled inside. Her breath hitched, her knees protested, but she moved. Silas knelt, pulling the panel back into place just as hooves crunched outside, slow, heavy, deliberate. Then a knock, hard, demanding. Silas opened the door. 3 men stood in the snow, rifles slung across their backs, coats dusted in frost. The one in front held a paper in one gloved hand, creased, damp, marked with her face. "We're looking for a girl," the leader said. "Pregnant, late 20s. Might have passed through these woods." Silas leaned against the frame, expression blank. "Haven't seen anyone." The second man narrowed his eyes. "You live alone?" "Been that way a long time." "We've got reason to believe she ran this way," the leader pushed. "Might be hiding." Silas didn't flinch. His axe rested against the wall beside him, his hand inches from its handle. "You want her?" he said, voice low. "You'll have to take me first." The air grew still. The man's boots creaked as he shifted. Behind them, the forest groaned with wind. The third rider glanced uneasily at Silas's stance, at his stillness, his eyes, his quiet that didn't waver. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Let's move on." And just like that, they turned. Snow fell between them as Silas watched the shadows retreat into the trees. He didn't close the door until the sound of hooves was gone. Then he opened the panel. Delilah crawled out, eyes wide with held breath. Her voice was a whisper. "They'll come back." Silas nodded. "Then we won't be here." The snow came down heavier with every step. Silas pushed the wagon forward through the white blur of dawn, boots sinking ankle-deep into the drift. Beside him, beneath thick wool and canvas, Delilah lay curled on a bed of straw, her breath short, hands pressed to her belly. They had left the cabin behind hours ago. No trail, no fire left burning, no sign to follow. Ahead, nestled beside the frozen bend of a river, smoke curled from a chimney barely visible behind a grove of willow trees. "She's still there," Silas muttered to himself. "She better be." Delilah gritted her teeth as another pain ripped through her side. This one was sharper, lower, deeper than the rest. "She's coming," Delilah whispered. "Silas." "She's not waiting." He didn't answer. His jaw clenched, breath fogging the air. At the gate stood a woman, small, wrapped in fur, her gray braid whipped by the wind. She didn't wave. She didn't ask. She simply opened the door before they reached it. "You brought the storm with you," Etta Wynne said, her voice dry as cedar smoke. Silas only nodded. "And the fire you need to keep alive." Her eyes fell to Delilah's pale face, her heaving chest, her trembling hands. The midwife didn't ask for names or reasons. She simply opened her arms. Inside the cottage, the air was warm, thick with herbs and firelight. Etta guided Delilah to a low cot near the hearth, her hands firm and sure. "She's close," she said. "Too close." Silas hovered in the doorway, coat still on, hands clenched. Etta looked up. "Boil water, set the iron pot, bring cloth, and sharpen that knife. You'll need it." Silas stared at her, as if he'd forgotten how to move. "She's not waiting for comfort," Etta said. "She's waiting for strength." He dropped his coat, grabbed the kettle, and set to work. Delilah moaned as another contraction struck, her fingers clawing at the quilt. Silas returned to her side, cloth in one hand, heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know how to help," he whispered. Her hand found his. "Just don't leave." And he didn't. He stayed. The blizzard outside howled like a pack of wolves mourning the moon. Snow slammed against the stone walls of the cottage, clawing at windows, rattling the shutters with ghost knuckles. But inside was fire. Inside was pain and purpose. Delilah gripped the edges of the wool blanket beneath her, knuckles white, eyes wild with agony and determination. Sweat beaded on her brow, despite the cold just beyond the door. Her back arched with another contraction that stole the breath from her lungs. "Now," Etta barked from the foot of the cot. "Push, girl. She's coming." Delilah screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was raw, guttural, ancient. The sound of flesh splitting, of spirit pushing through bone. Her hands clawed blindly until they found his. Silas. He knelt beside her, face pale, brow damp, jaw clenched so tightly it could have cracked. He didn't speak, didn't pretend to understand. He just let her squeeze his hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to this earth. "You're doing it," he whispered hoarsely. "You're here. I'm here." Etta moved like wind and fire, silent, precise. She laid out linens, dipped cloth in steaming water, whispered things neither of them could understand. Outside, thunder cracked overhead, and the fire leapt in the hearth as if in answer. Delilah cried out again, tears streaking her temples. "I can't." "You can," Etta snapped. "You already are." Another contraction came like a wave, violent, seizing. Her scream was aflame, and Silas didn't flinch. He pressed a cold cloth to her forehead with shaking hands, then leaned in close. "Breathe with me," he said. "Just breathe." She did, somehow. And then, there it was, the cry, high, sharp, piercing, louder than the wind, purer than the flame. A baby's cry. Delilah collapsed back onto the cot, body trembling, sobbing with a sound that was half laughter, half relief. Etta lifted the child, wrapped in linen, streaked with the storm and the fire, and the fight it took to get here. She placed the bundle gently on Delilah's chest, tiny fists, a heartbeat against her skin. Delilah wept openly now. She looked at Silas, voice barely above a breath. "You kept the fire for me," she whispered, brushing the baby's cheek with her thumb. "Now I'll keep her for us." The storm passed, but something deeper stayed. In the quiet that followed the birth, the world seemed to breathe again. Snow still blanketed the trees outside, but inside the stone cottage, the fire burned with a steadier rhythm. No longer a survival flame, but a hearth for something new. Silas worked in silence. Each morning before the sun climbed over Graywood Ridge, he rose and stepped outside to gather pine. Not just any pine, he searched for wood that sang when struck, the kind that held the scent of life even beneath the bark. Then he carved. The blade moved slow but sure through the grain, his hands steady, his face unreadable. He said nothing, not to Delilah, not to Etta, not even to the child. But each stroke said more than words ever could. The cradle took shape piece by piece. He didn't copy the old one. This one would be stronger. Thicker rails, smoother corners. Along its sides, he carved delicate wildflowers, ones he remembered from another spring. Long ago, when tiny fingers once picked them from a meadow that no longer grew. Delilah watched from the corner near the fire, the baby, Willa, curled against her chest in a shawl. She never interrupted. She simply listened to the sound of wood meeting blade, of grief being shaped into something that could hold life. One afternoon, she approached quietly, eyes on the curling shavings at his feet. "You carved flowers." Silas nodded, not looking up. "She used to pick them," he said, voice raw. "Your daughter." He paused, thumb brushing a ridge in the wood. "Ellie." Delilah rested her hand on the side of the cradle, over one carved bloom. "She would have loved this." He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because the cabin had changed. Where once it had been a shelter for ghosts, it was now a place where a baby laughed in her sleep, and a woman hummed lullabies older than war. Where firelight didn't just survive the dark, it warmed it. Where grief was no longer the only thing he carved. The snow had begun to thaw in patches, revealing dark soil beneath the white. Ice still clung to the north-facing trees, but the sun had returned in soft streaks through the evergreens. Inside the cabin, Willa slept peacefully in her new cradle, her tiny breaths a rhythm Delilah had come to match. But peace, like spring, arrived in uncertain steps. The dogs growled first, low, guttural sounds from the edge of the clearing. Silas was already on his feet before the knock came. 3 riders. This time they didn't come with questions. They came with a poster. The paper fluttered in the wind, nailed to a leather glove. A face drawn in ink. A reward. A lie written in official ink across Delilah's name. Silas stepped out onto the porch, his axe in one hand, the door swinging shut behind him with a hollow thud. The lead hunter raised the poster. "We're looking for a runaway. White woman, 20-something. Gave birth recently. Name's Delilah Vane." Silas didn't look at the paper. He looked straight into the man's eyes. "She's a mother," he said. "Not a criminal." The second man shifted in his saddle. "That's not for you to decide." Silas's grip didn't tighten. His breath didn't rise. He stood like the trees behind him, rooted, immovable. "You want her?" he said calmly. "You'll have to take me first." The men hesitated. It wasn't the axe that stopped them. It was the way he said it, like a promise already kept, like a man who had nothing left to lose but one fragile firelight he'd sworn to protect. One of them muttered, "He's serious." The leader's eyes flicked to the cabin, to the barely visible shadow of a woman behind the curtain, holding something small and precious in her arms. Then slowly, he turned his horse. "We'll try elsewhere." The others followed. Silas stood there until the sound of hooves faded. Only then did he lower the axe. Behind him, Delilah opened the door. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He had said what no man had ever said for her, not with words, but with the way he didn't move. He had stood, like a mountain. Spring arrived in quiet ways, melted snow dripping from the roof, soft green pushing up through black earth, birds returning in 2s instead of 3s. The cabin changed again. Fresh timber reinforced the roof. A second window let golden light fall onto a hand-built table scarred with notches from dropped spoons and laughter. Herbs hung in clusters above the hearth. The cradle sat near the fire, polished smooth, its wildflowers glowing amber in the flicker. And Willa, she grew. She cooed in her sleep, grasped at her father's beard, and studied her mother's face with eyes that seemed to remember things she couldn't yet speak. Silas carved toys in the evenings, tiny horses, bears, even a crooked little fox. Not because he had to, because someone would one day name them. One morning, a letter arrived, an invitation. The nearby village was hosting its spring festival, a bonfire, storytelling, bread passed hand to hand. At first, Silas grumbled, "We're not people for gatherings." Delilah smiled. "No, but she might be." So they went. The fire in the village square was taller than any man, circled in stone, its flames licking toward the stars. Elders sat in worn shawls, children danced barefoot on thawed ground, and strangers offered food without questions. When they asked for someone to speak, the crowd fell into a hush. Delilah stepped forward, the baby nestled in a sling across her chest, Silas beside her. Clean shirt, boots shined as best as wood ash could manage. She cleared her throat. "My name is Delilah Vane," she began. "Once I was sold for a price that wouldn't buy a good horse. I was shackled, silenced, left for wolves." She paused, eyes scanning the fire, the crowd, then her family. "But I ran. Not because I was brave, because the child inside me kicked so hard I thought she was begging me to live." She looked at Silas. "I wasn't rescued by a hero with fine words. I was found by a man who cursed more than he spoke, who never told me I was safe. He just made it true." Silence held for a moment, then settled soft and deep. Silas stepped forward, pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden blade, carved carefully, smoothed at the edges. He placed it gently in Willa's hand. One word etched along the side: hope. "She'll outgrow it," he said, voice rough, "but she'll remember it was sharp once." They don't ride in with guns blazing or end with a kiss beneath fireworks. They unfold in the hush between storms, in a cradle carved from grief, in a hand that never let go, in a fire that wasn't just lit, but kept alive. Silas never asked to be a father again. Delilah never expected to be more than a burden. But somehow in a world that had tried to break them both, they became what the other had lost. And maybe that's the lesson for us today. Not every hero speaks in big speeches. Sometimes love is a man who builds instead of breaks. Sometimes strength is a woman who chooses to raise life when all she's ever known is survival. In a time where families fall apart and kindness is often treated as weakness, this story reminds us that protection, patience, and presence still matter, especially for those of us who've lived long enough to know what real loss feels like. Tell us in the comments, share your stories. You might not think they matter, but someone out there needs to hear exactly what you lived through. And if this tale stirred something in you, a memory, a wish, or even just a flicker of warmth, then hit that like button. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories so you don't miss the next fire we light. Because out here, we don't just tell stories to pass time. We tell them to remind each other that love still lives in cabins, that hope still fits in tiny hands, and that the fire once lit can still stay. Until next time, may your nights be warm, your steps steady, and your stories never forgotten.